And I don't think everybody's here yet, but we'll just start with the people that we do have. And because we have a lot to talk about and the more interesting stuff comes later.
Did you want me to stay, Celeste, or do you think you have enough support?
We're always happy to have you stay, but if you need to go do your life, and that's totally understandable.
Okay, well, if you don't need me, I'm going to go ahead and log off, and I hope you have a good meeting.
Thank you. Okay. And thank you, Jen, for helping out. Here's our agenda today. We just added one thing to it today. A Colorado Sun article came out about Kent Theory's citizen initiative effort. So that is an interesting thing to talk about. Here's our voting methods position, which everybody has seen, I think. Here are our meeting norms, and there are some new names, one or two new names on this list, but we can come back to this slide if there's any problem with people not going according to our meeting norms. Here are our minutes from last time. We had a special guest, Justine Metz from the Center for Election Science. And you can watch the meeting if you want and see the slides at those links. And one of the things that we did last time is we decided we would try for a 5:30 start time for the November meeting. And we've been having a few difficulties starting on time. So this time I made a special request to open up the meeting at 5:15, and it worked. Does anybody have any questions about the meeting minutes? We're zooming through the business part. So let's do some meeting introductions. Peggy, could I ask you to go through and call on people to do introductions? Here are all the people who are sort of the administrators of this meeting. Jane Dunk let us in.
Celeste, it would be easier to stop screen sharing while we do introductions, so we can
I will. I just wanted everybody to see these names, and I'm going to stop screen sharing right now. And did we lose Peggy? Oh, there's Peggy. Are you okay?
So what are we doing? We're introducing ourselves?
Yes.
Okay, well, so I'll start with myself since I have the floor. And I'm from Boulder County. I live in Louisville, and didn't vote in the ranked choice voting in Boulder, but I was very interested and heard plenty about it. So, all right. So how about Deborah?
I'm Deborah Lycan, and I live in Durango, and I'm very interested in election reform and have been working with this committee for a few months, I guess, a month or so, on the study guide.
Okay, how about Jen?
Hi, I'm Jen Cleland. I'm together with Celeste. I co-lead the Boulder County League's voting methods team. Yeah.
And you're an expert in?
Redistricting and gerrymandering and those sorts of things.
She's a math professor at CU.
Yay, math.
Yay, math.
All right, Dwight.
I'm Dwight Shellman. I'm the county support manager. It's been a busy time of year. I'm sorry. I'm the county support manager for the elections division of the Secretary of State's office. And I participated in these things because my mom was a member of League of Women Voters, and I do this to honor her, and also particularly in this group, because I too am very interested in alternative voting methods and other reforms.
All right, thanks. Chris?
Yeah, this is Chris Baum, and I'm a member of the Approval Voting Party and very interested in alternative voting methods.
Neil?
Neil McBurnett in Boulder, Colorado, and a fan of alternate voting methods for many decades, and proportional representation, and heavily engaged in auditing elections and election security.
Tony? You're muted.
Thanks for telling me that. So I'm Tony Larson. I'm actually trying to coordinate all the task forces, so people are not duplicating efforts, or if there are efforts that are being done that others should know about. That's pretty much my job.
Okay. And I don't think we really heard an introduction from Celeste.
I get to plan these meetings, and anybody who wants to take on half of the role or more, let me know. And I'm in Boulder with the Boulder County League of Women Voters. And I had an excellent time hanging out with Neil and Dwight this morning at the county clerk's office for the risk limiting audit of Boulder's instant runoff voting election. Okay, I think that's everybody, right? We might get a few more people coming in, but I'll go back to sharing my screen. Okay. So a couple of things. Dwight, I don't know if you know anything about the Denver League's program briefing on RCV that they had on October 17th. I've tried to reach out to Frank Bennett, and I think there's some other people who are planning on going, but I haven't heard anything about it. Okay. There's a PR1, meaning Proportional Representation 101 webinar every month, held by Fair Vote Canada. And if we have time, we're going to watch a movie, a video by Fair Vote Canada about proportional representation. So I try to advertise these on this slide so that people will can go if they are interested. The next meeting date is probably December 18th, 5:30 to 7 on Zoom. If that 5:30 is an okay time for people. I think it's better for the league staff. So we could go back to 6:30, but does anybody have questions, comments about December 18th? Shall we mark?
I might have a hard time making that meeting because I'm leaving Berkeley the next morning, so I'm probably going to be furiously packing that night. But that's okay.
Okay.
You can have a meeting without me.
That's what you think, Jen. Okay, some possible ideas of things we can talk about is more about Kent Theory's proposed citizen initiative. We might know more about it then. There's a fellow in Minnesota who's very interested. I think he's the one who brought up contingent elections for the president. And then we can talk about what we might do at the next meeting, but right now, I guess we'll schedule it for December 18th. And every month, we also have an update on the primary election reform study that we're doing. Okay, so here's what is on the agenda today. I hope to hear a lot from the other Boulder folks here about instant runoff voting, and speak up if you on any of these topics. In fact, I might even go around the room and have people read different parts of slides. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so that Sarah T can introduce herself. I think it's Sarah Tar. Will you say hi to us, Sarah? Tony, do we have any policy about this that we need to worry about, or not just yet, or?
Might just be having some audio difficulty, but
Maybe. Okay, we also have another person, Latina Adams, who's now in here. So it would be great if Latina would say hi also.
Hi there.
Hi, Latina. we've gone around and introduced ourselves already. Would you say, you know, a little about yourself, where you live, and maybe why you are joining the group today, or?
So I live in Aurora near, excuse me, 225 and Iliff. And I've been really interested in, well, I read a couple books that helped me understand the importance of preserving our democracy. And I don't remember the name of them. I didn't know I was going to have to talk. And I also looked at, I can't remember what it was. It might have been United. They've got Open Democracy is on, I think Washington State has an open discussion on Tuesday evenings. And I'm just interested in different methods, because I think that I was getting really discouraged about how to fix the discourse. And I think the answer is, if people can vote and their votes matter, and some of the alternative voting methods, I think would make a big difference.
So that open democracy thing that you're talking about, is that the Washington League? Or it's another group?
Let me just put the, oh no, it's Star Voting. Let me put the link in the chat. Can I do that or not?
Sure.
Please.
Welcome. We're so happy to have you here, Latina. Am I pronouncing your name right?
Yes.
Okay. And we've had Star Voting people come and talk to us about Star Voting. So yeah, great. Sarah, are you back now? Do you want to introduce yourself? Okay, maybe not.
Sarah's muted on my screen.
Yeah,
Sarah's
we see
muted,
you
but
muted. Can you invite Sarah to unmute?
I just clicked ask to unmute. But
Bottom left.
why don't we move on? Because we have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. Okay, so the first thing on the agenda is the instant runoff voting mayoral election. And just some background in 2020, and because this is actually important for the discussion, Boulder adopted instant runoff voting for mayor. And the question actually was two parts, although it was only one yes or no you could answer. Part one was, do you want to directly elect the mayor? And part two was, do you want to use instant runoff voting to do that? So you could only vote yes or no. You couldn't, the league, in fact, did not take a position on this because we don't have a position on direct election of mayor, especially a weak mayor. So we skipped out on this in terms of taking a pro or con position. Here's what the ballot looked like. Everybody should take a good look at it because we're going to talk about this. The directions say fill in one first choice, and then you can fill in a second choice if you choose. It should be a different person if you want your vote to have any effect at the second choice level, and then you can fill in a third choice after that, also should be different. Okay, does anybody have questions about this ballot? It was on the same ballot sheet as all the other contests people had to vote on. So sometimes places want the ballot sheet to be different for the instant runoff voting versus the plurality elections. Okay, I think that Jen can see like hands raised and things like that. So I need you to be helping out. So some considerations. We gave a presentation with the city clerk and county clerk. this is the League of Women Voters of Boulder County gave this presentation. And here are some takeaways that we said. Your number one ranking is the only ranking that's guaranteed to be counted. And don't confuse ranking with voting. Just because you rank 3 candidates doesn't mean your vote will count toward each of those. And it will probably only count for your first. For most people, it will only count for your first. And we'll talk about that in the Boulder context. Interestingly, if there are 4 candidates and 4 possible rankings, your 4th ranking will never be counted. So in Boulder, you could rank up to 4, but there was no reason to do the 4th one because by the time you eliminated 3 candidates, the 4th one was the winner. So you never got that far. You'd only eliminate a maximum of 2 and then see which of the remaining 2 candidates had a higher score, higher number of votes. And then, of course, you should rank as many candidates as you feel comfortable ranking to give you a chance to have more say in the outcome. Any questions on these? These are pretty basic. We could get into a lot of other controversial sort of voter strategy, but this is basic. Everybody can agree on these, I think. Okay, so how well did IRV form of RCV work in Broomfield? You may not have known that Broomfield was supposed to be using instant runoff voting. And in fact, they did not, but they were supposed to. They have 5 ward contests and 1 mayoral contest every 2 years, but they only had 9 candidates running for the 6 seats. Since no seat had more than 2 candidates, Broomfield did not use instant runoff voting. And that meant that Boulder had to bear the entire cost of the state software license, which was about $75,000. And Dwight can correct me if I'm wrong on that. So Broomfield said, Boulder, have a good time. Let us know what you learned. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about a distraction from the whole instant runoff voting process in Boulder. Opinions on IRV might be clouded by the fact that Boulder made that second change, which was going from a council-chosen mayor to a directly elected mayor. And here are some of the differences of opinion. Some people like directly electing the mayor. Some are hoping Boulder moves to a 4-year mayoral term. That actually would conflict, I think, with LWVBC's position that says voters should have the chance to elect at least half of the people on the municipal governing body. So if they went to a 4-year mayoral term, then you wouldn't be able to elect half unless you changed something else. Some people might like to have a strong mayor, but Pueblo has tried that, and there are people pushing back against that. So it would be great if we all talked to each other and got buy-in from everybody before we make these changes. Okay, some people don't see the point in the public voting for a mayor, particularly a weak mayor. And some people regret losing a public servant. So in this particular election, there were 2 people whose council terms were up, and they ran for mayor, and only 1 person can be mayor. So one or both of those expiring council members could have was going to not be in office anymore, versus the way it was before, where we elected everybody to council, and then we indirectly elected the mayor, because first we elected council members and then they picked one of their own. Deborah?
Sorry, I don't understand what you mean by quote weak or quote strong. Is that an opinion, or that's a aspect of elections that I don't understand?
So in Boulder, a weak mayor, they only help set the agenda. They run the meetings, but they don't have any extra power voting wise or anything like that. So
it's a common term for that situation.
Something that's different is Colorado Springs has a strong mayor.
Mm-hmm. And they have more power than running the meeting. I understand now. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
As
I think in Denver, the mayor
Yeah.
can veto
Hmm.
Yeah.
And the mayor
or
appoints.
something
after-
like that, but
Yeah.
they
there's
have
a
some
lot
kind of
more that you
special.
could do.
Tony, were you going to say something?
I said Denver has a strong mayor and they can appoint people for various positions. And they have, more power of the purse. So there are lots of things that they can do that you can't do if you're a weak mayor and then essentially a member of the council.
Tony, did you go to the Denver's program briefing league event on RCV?
I did not.
Okay. It would be great for our group to get a report on how that went. I've reached out to somebody in the Denver League who I think was going to go there, but anyway, okay. So this was a distraction from the instant runoff voting part, but this was an important part of the election. So I think it's important for us to have this background. Now let's talk about how instant runoff voting works. You count the first choices as votes in the first round. And if a candidate gets more than half the votes, that's over. The election's over. It's basically the same thing as plurality. Nobody sees the second, third, fourth, and fifth choices. That's why they're covered up here. So you can see how what the transparency or lack of transparency is. Okay, so then round two, if Alba whatever is eliminated, then and nobody got more than half the votes in the first round, then this ballot would transfer its vote to Bill Boyd. You still don't know who third, fourth, and fifth choices are, but you keep eliminating the lowest vote getter until somebody has more than half the votes, or they're basically, yeah, the statement up here says something a little different, but it's effectively the same thing. Okay, so let's look at Boulder's results. So this is going to be a little interactive. You can turn on your microphone. Who is winning in round one?
Bob Yates.
Bob Yates is winning in round one. Who's losing in round one? Like the definitive loser in round one, the lowest vote getter.
Paul Tweedle.
Paul Tweedley, yeah. He came out of nowhere. Nobody knew who he was. The other three candidates, Aaron, Nicole, and Bob, have all been on city council and are currently serving. Aaron and Bob's terms are about to be over as city council. Aaron Brockett was the mayor of Boulder, but he was chosen by council, and his yard sign said, "Re-elect Aaron Brockett as mayor," which was kind of interesting because we didn't elect him as mayor originally. We elected him as a council member. Okay, so we have all of these votes here, and they add up to this 32,893. What does this next row mean? Do you all know?
People who did not vote for mayor at all.
Yes, people who do not vote for mayor. Exhausted is not relevant in the first round. We'll talk about that in the next round. And then overvotes. Can somebody explain what an overvote is?
That's people who marked two different choices for their number one.
And Jen is an expert on this because she studied the Alaska instant runoff voting election. Okay, so then there's this number 1,000.
Jen, it would have been so cool to have you today at the
I was tempted to come, but I just couldn't make the schedule work.
No, I get it, but there was much discussion of the different invalid ways that people mark their ballots, and so hopefully we will get all of the data needed for you to analyze that again.
Oh yeah, I want.
badly marked ballots, and yet what didn't happen very often. So
I want the cast vote record.
I asked for it many times. Hopefully
So,
we'll get-
I'm gonna, Deborah, go ahead.
What happens to the people who overvote? Did they just get thrown out?
Yep.
Okay.
The votes get put in a pile. They tried to vote, they cast their ballot, but their vote doesn't count. So how would you figure out how many ballots were cast in this election? How many Boulder voters turned in a ballot?
add up the numbers between continuing ballots total and overvotes.
And blanks.
What about blanks?
I said between those two. So
Oh,
continuing
yeah.
ballots total, blanks, exhausted, and overvotes.
Mhm. I see.
so basically the bold-faced numbers, the 32,893 and the
Oh,
1,356.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's about 34,000. Okay. So that's how many ballots were cast, and that's going to come up in a little while. And then the threshold number is, anybody else want to explain the threshold number
Over 50%.
of what?
The
Continue.
total cost. I don't know. I'm just
Of what?
guessing.
Of the number you just, of the continuing ballots.
Only the continuing ballots.
I
It's
see.
only, it's 50%, just over 51, whatever integer is just over 50% of the continuing ballots. So if you turned it in blank, it's not considered in the threshold. They're only doing the continuing ballots to get the threshold. Okay, and then you can see the percents that people got, and they add up to 100%. And what is 100% here? What number would be 100%? Like 30,
Yeah, 32,893.
yeah, 32,893. Okay, and then there's this column called transfer elimination. So what's happening in that column?
They eliminate both Nicole and Paul at the same time in something called a batch elimination. Essentially, all the candidates who mathematically could not gain enough votes to win, and they transfer those votes. They look at the second choice, if there is one, for those ballots, and if there is a second choice, then that gets transferred somewhere else. But I can't tell you if, I guess those numbers, yeah, those numbers are exactly the same in transfer elimination as they are in votes. So what they're saying is that those are either transferred or exhausted.
Mm.
Well, there are 475 exhausted. We can see that. And 3 more overvotes. We don't use
so the
blank
475
anymore.
is included within the 63, 69, and 749. So that's why I say the transfer. Yeah, okay, yeah. That's actually rather confusing, I would say. I don't see why they don't put the actual
There's a
numbers
lot
in.
of information in that column. Right. So because the red votes are the votes from the losers. Those could be transferred or exhausted and
Or overvotes.
or overvotes. And so the ones of them that are transferred are the positive numbers for Aaron Brockett and Bob Yates in this columns. And then the ones that are exhausted and overvotes are no, I would spread this out among at least 2 columns to show all that.
And
So
I
a lot
would
of
not
people have
reduplicate the
complained.
information.
A lot of people have complained that they didn't understand these 2 red lines. Because in almost every practice that was shown, I think there's a website that includes batch elimination, but in every other practice people heard about, it talked about eliminating the lowest vote getter and then eliminating the next vote getter in the next round. So it was 1 elimination per round. And by doing a batch elimination, we confused a lot of people. So the Secretary of State and the county clerks are going to talk about whether they should change that. So getting back to what Neil said, like why you can eliminate both of these. If Bob Yates had 50,000 votes instead of 14,271, then he would have won in the first round, because you add up all the other people's votes and it doesn't meet 50,000. Here, Paul Tweedley is definitely out. If all of Paul Tweedley's votes went to Nicole Spear, could she catch up with the next person, which is Aaron Brockett?
No.
No, she can't. And you can see most of the votes, the 6,369 plus the 749, most of them went to which candidate, Aaron or Bob?
Aaron.
5,000 went to Aaron, like 5-1, basically, pretty much went to Aaron. And that's not surprising if you were in Boulder, because you know that they got dual endorsements. So people would rank one first and the other second. The other thing is Nicole Spear has 2 more years left on her council term. So people may have thought, I want to elect Aaron. I like both of them. I want to elect Aaron, and Nicole will still be on council. So it's all good, you know? Anyway, okay. Shall we go to the next slide? Here we do the math. We add Aaron's 11,504 plus the 5,319, and you get 16,823. Then same thing for Bob Yates. And now suddenly the tables have turned, and some people were unhappy about this, but this is how instant runoff voting works. If we didn't have this, first of all, Nicole might not have run because she would be afraid of being a spoiler. And then if we didn't have this and she had run, then Bob Yates would have won in a plurality election with 43%. So instant runoff voting worked how it was intended to work. Whether or not you want to directly elect the mayor or not, that's a separate issue. Does anybody have comments on this? Oh, notice the threshold. What happened to the threshold? Do you see the threshold at the bottom?
Yeah, since there were more exhausted votes and overvotes, then the threshold went lower. Because you only need to get half of the valid votes.
Half of the continuing ballots.
Yeah.
I think we should be very careful as the league to talk about valid votes, because if you had a valid vote in round 1, you voted in the election. And I don't think we should say that you aren't a valid voter anymore.
Yeah.
In fact, I would argue that we should always look at the votes in round 1. And there are a lot of people who, there's a big group. I mean, you might hear the term false majority, which means that you didn't get more than half the votes cast. So if you look at this next slide, my mouse is okay. If you look over here, if you want to take the percent of votes that Aaron got as a percent of the total votes cast, he got 51.14%. So it's pretty close. There weren't that many leftover, votes that got exhausted or overvoted from round 1 to round 2. But then another way to look at it, and I know there's at least one fan on this call that likes to do this, is looking at a percentage of the entire number of ballots cast. And in that case, nobody would have gotten a majority, because some 1,315 ballots were blank, and that would make up a lot of this difference. Interesting, huh?
So the other thing that happened was that on the first night, after the first ballots were counted, it looked like Bob Yates was ahead, even with Nicole, even with Nicole's and Paul's votes transferred, he was ahead of Aaron Brockett. So then,
By like 8%.
yeah, it was huge. And, you know, the Daily Camera comes out and it's looking like Bob Yates is winning. But then as more votes came in, the people who voted on election day, those voted more overwhelmingly for Aaron and Nicole. So he eventually, it took like 2 or 3 ballot dumps before Aaron finally came out ahead. And so there were people who thought that ranked choice voting caused that. And, you know, and they thought, oh, how embarrassing for ranked choice voting that it had the wrong result on the first night. But it was just that the votes, you know, just the early votes had been counted.
Mhm.
And it's called a red mirage or a blue shift, or there are terms for it when it happens, because it in terms of political affiliation, Democrats tend to vote more on election. Is that right? No, I don't know. Dwight
It's
probably
different-
knows
different
better.
places.
Anyway, there's often a shift, but Latina has her
you
hand
have
up.
to-
Yeah, I think Democrats would tend to vote early, wouldn't they? Or no,
Theories have varied, and it used to be that Republicans were urged to not vote absentee and to vote in person, but they also tend to be. I really wonder if Dwight has more insights, but it's complicated.
so can you explain?
Unclear.
I'm getting mixed up with the exhausted and the overvotes. What does exhausted votes mean?
So exhausted is say someone only voted for one candidate and didn't rank a second choice candidate. So say if you just voted, like if Paul Tweedley's your guy and you don't want to vote for anybody else, then once he's eliminated, you didn't say anything about the other 3 candidates. So your ballot
Oh, I
is at
see.
that point.
And what about the overvotes?
That's when somebody gave 2 or more people the same ranking. So if you ranked 2 candidates as your first choice or as your second choice in the second round.
Right. So the 3 in that column, in the transfer elimination column, says that there were just 3 people who had a valid vote in the first choice. And then when their vote was eliminated, they had an overvote. They voted for 2 different candidates as their second choice.
So
And the total is
a good
44
question
votes
is,
net.
so what if you put Paul Tweedley as your first choice, and then you put for your second choice Nicole Spear and Aaron Brockett? I think that with batch elimination, it would count toward Aaron, but
it would have to, because otherwise batch elimination would change the result.
yeah, so maybe Dwight knows the answer to that. I don't know.
Don't.
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, have we beaten this slide enough and go on to the next one?
Yeah.
So I'll just say that the elimination of 2 candidates in the first round, if it just can't change the result, that is currently required by a Secretary of State rule. So I'm just going to tee up a possible future revision to change that, because I can see why that would create a lot of confusion or just kind of muddy the waters. It would be
Yeah.
clear if you just did it serially, you know, so.
Especially if there are only 4 candidates. So. Thanks,
So,
Dwight.
Celeste, yeah, I really appreciate that, Dwight, and I hope we do pursue that. And I just want to respond to Celeste's very interesting question, and I will suggest that it would be way too complicated if how you interpret a ballot depended on who was winning. Okay, so you can't, the voting system, and I can imagine contradictions if you allowed people to say, well, but if Nicole was going to win, then, you know, you would count it as an overvote, but it wouldn't be an overvote if she wasn't, you know, you would end up saying, well, if the order of elimination was different, now all of a sudden it's not an overvote. Don't go there is my urge.
Fortunately, most people don't have to worry about this. They just vote their preference order.
And for
Okay.
example, in the audit, the people interpreting each individual ballot, and the audit assumes that we don't know the answer. So people interpreting a ballot in the audit would have to decide just based on the face value of the ballot. They wouldn't be able to say, well, if we got to a round 2 where we had this circumstance, then I'd count it this way. You just can't go there.
Okay, let's talk about how well IRV worked in Boulder. Neil, you get to do the first one. And if you agree, great. If you don't agree, say why.
Absolutely more expressive way to mark a ballot.
And endorsing candidates? Like
Sure.
some people, some organizations endorse too. Peggy, how about you go next?
More interested in the election, yes. I was interested, and I was in Louisville. But I will point out that I mentioned this at our Boulder County meeting the other day, our member meeting. On Friday night, I watched PBS, and Channel 12 at 8 o'clock, they've got Colorado Inside Out, and then they've got John Caldera's show. And
Devil's Advocate.
yeah, Devil's Advocate. Yeah, I can't say that. Anyway, and both shows talked about it. And John Caldera, who does live in Boulder, he's the president of the Independence Institute, libertarian and all that. So he kind of liked ranked choice voting, but he didn't like the way the candidates were eliminated. He wanted to know who he was voting for in the second round. I mean, I don't know. Somehow it was almost like he wanted to have that separate election a month later.
I listened to that show, and first of all, Marianne Goodland was not prepared to talk about the election, so she said some things that were not entirely correct. And I reached out to her, and she said, he threw me for a loop. I wasn't expecting that question. And then secondly, John Caldera said that he actually would have preferred approval voting for this election.
Yeah, I thought that.
Because then you could see all the people that you supported, not just the number one choice, for instance. So I suggest you go and listen to it. It's the first 4 minutes of the Devil's Advocate, so you don't have to listen to the rest of it, if you're interested. So, okay, Peggy, do you want to? I mean, not Peggy. How about Jen? You want to do the next one?
Sure. Is voters' full opinion recorded? Not so much. For 78% of voters, it's no different from choose one. So where does that number come from? That's the number. So if your first choice was either Aaron or Bob, then your first choice continued to be the way you voted until the final round. And in all versions of ranked choice voting, but in particular in instant runoff voting, as long as your first choice candidate is still in the race, that's the only thing that the counting procedure sees about your vote. So if I voted for Aaron, then it is never recorded whether my next choice was Nicole or Bob.
Wow, what a great explanation. And approval and star or score are not ranking methods, they're ratings. So all of the scores or all of the approvals or votes for candidates show up for the whole election, not just one particular round. Well, star voting has a second round. It's a little different. Okay, anyway. Chris, do you want to do the next one?
Okay. Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that. We had a similar situation in North Glen where we had plurality voting, and there were two candidates for council that were virtually the same, or mayor, I can't remember which, but they were virtually the same. And if I had approval voting or probably instant runoff, I could have ranked the two, but in plurality voting, if I voted for one and he turned out to be a absolute loser, then my vote basically didn't count. Does that make sense?
Well, and did the third person win then? I mean,
Yes. Yes.
yeah, they split the
Third
vote.
person won by landslide.
Yeah,
And there's some talk that this happened in Longmont also.
I've heard
Yeah.
that.
Tony, you want to do the next one? I don't know if Tony's on or not. Latina. Or I can do this one and we can, because this one's a little wonky. So did we result in a majority winner? Yes, we did this time of votes cast, but not of ballots cast. So it depends how you want to define it. But the State League of Women Voters is very particular about the word majority. We actually got it taken out of a proposed position for the National League. And then we voted for it after they took out the word majority. But if you go back to here on the right-hand side, nobody got a majority of ballots cast, but Aaron did get a majority of the votes cast. So, okay. How about Latina, this one?
Save money compared to
Previously.
um
A lot of times people talk, one of the arguments for instant runoff voting is, oh, we won't have to have a runoff. Well, Boulder didn't have a runoff before. They didn't have a mayoral contest. So there's no way we could save any money. We were adding an election, adding a contest. So this is
that's not because of the RCV. That's because of what you said earlier, that that's two different things. So
yes,
I
right.
say it would save money. It wouldn't save money over just vote for one, or just vote for one. But as far as runoffs, having the instant runoff is better than, like, I mean, the example I can think of is Georgia. That was a month later. I mean, that costs a lot of extra money. But if you're going to have a runoff,
there are arguments saying that basically we should be careful about using this argument, because it's not always true that even with having just one election, because the tabulation software costs more money, because there's more voter education, we need to be cautious about whether it saves money in when it replaces a runoff election. So I've heard
You have your
people.
hand up?
Did somebody ask me a question?
You had your hand up.
Oh, yes. I wanted to go back to this voters' full opinion recorded, not so much. My question was, do people care so long as their first choice vote mattered? I'm wondering how much people respond negatively to the fact that their second and third choice didn't matter.
So I can give you an example when they might care. If there's a candidate who is a broad consensus as everybody's second choice, but is not anybody's first choice, so they get eliminated in the first round, then if your preferred candidate doesn't end up winning, you never got a chance to say who your second choice candidate was.
I see. Thank you.
And this actually happened in a special election for Congress in Alaska in summer of 22.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that was in August of 2022. And then they had a repeat election in November of 2022. And we saw a little bit different voter behavior, like people filled out their ballots better, more valid ballots came around, things like that. So we're learning. People are learning. This is good. And there's always expected to be a learning curve. I love that question, Deborah. Thank you for asking it. And I think a lot of people might not care as much as, we don't know how much people care because they can't give a score. They just say, this is my first, this is my second. We don't know if it's like a close second or a distant second. Yeah. A lot of times instant runoff voting says, they say, oh, it will reduce negative campaigning, but that was not true in Boulder compared to the way we've done it in the council chosen mayor. And it might not even be true compared to like the council elections, although we had a pretty nasty one 2 years ago also. So I don't know. Anybody else from the Boulder area want to talk about this one?
I mean, it was interesting that you had some groups who were endorsing more than one candidate because of this. So in that sense, it meant that those two candidates who were endorsed together maybe weren't going as head to head against each other as they might have been. But you're right, there was this whole negative mailing thing. So I think that's not an absolute at all.
Aaron Brockett, I asked him about this and he said that I saw a sign of his and Bob Yates in somebody's yard. He said he had seen his and Bob's signs, and he had seen his and Nicole's signs in different yards. He had not seen Nicole and Bob in the same yard.
Well, so could we say that the actual candidates were not really negative? They were trying to get the second choice vote at least, and this was just an outside mailer that happened?
Well, it was, I know somebody who did not rank Nicole Spear because she didn't come out and lambast this mailer, whereas Aaron did come out and say, this is terrible. Bob is a good guy, whatever. So, what was your question again? Did I answer it?
Well, I guess I would say if that negative mailer had never happened, then wouldn't we say that the candidates themselves were not doing negative campaigning? They were trying to actively get the second choice vote and stuff.
Sure. But that's not always the case. In New York City, there was some negative campaigning directed by candidates at other candidates. So,
okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think the instant runoff voting folks are being more careful about making some of these claims because it looks bad if you make a claim and then it's not always true. I mean, number one and number two number one on this list should be true, like absolutely. So, and reducing effective spoiler candidates, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole point of using these other things. That's not necessarily why we use a better voting method. So, Peggy, you want to do the next one?
Sure. I don't see it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Encourage more people to run. Well, so I don't know. Don't you feel like Nicole wouldn't have run if we hadn't had IRV?
I think she would not have run in the public election. She might have run in the council chosen mayor election.
Yeah. But
I mean, I think
but like if it had been a mayor election, but not IRV, then I don't think she would have run because she would have been afraid she'd split the vote. Be a spoiler.
I think that's right. And it's interesting that in Broomfield, where they had IRV, it didn't encourage more people to run. So I don't know what to think about that. Okay. Did it elect more women and minorities? It's a very small sample size. One election, one seat. And no, it did not elect more women and minorities. So, okay.
Can you go back one more So I just wanted to suggest that something I was going to see if you included this. I would ask a question. Did it elect the candidate who would beat all the other candidates head to head? And it's kind of like majority winner point there.
We need the cast
and what I
ballot
really
record
wanted-
to answer that. We can't answer that just from the reporting that we have. Or maybe we could from the,
we might be able to guess in this case, but you know, this looks like a great list of questions to ask in general about voting methods. And so I'm just suggesting adding something that says, you know, there are two big reasons why sometimes you don't get a majority winner. In one of the situations, it's like this one where, you know, it could well have been, but was not in this case, that the winner did not get 50% of the first round votes. So that's a really clear, like, okay, it's not quite majority, but, you know, they did have more than anybody else.
Right. This happened with, I'll give an example. This happened in New York City with Eric Adams in the Democratic primary. It happened with London Breed as San Francisco mayor.
Not uncommon.
It happened with Jared Golden in Maine.
There's another reason which really highlights the invalidity of the notion of even caring about a majority. There are people who say it's not a good criterion to use. And that's the example from Alaska, where the final winner had a majority of the final round votes, but the final winner would have lost to the person eliminated in the previous round. So the person eliminated in the previous round would have beaten both of the final round candidates. So to even ask, you know, or calculate what does a majority look like, I think the more interesting question to ask is, would they beat all the other candidates head to head, which would have been true probably here, but I agree with Jen, we really should evaluate data in order to answer that question. We don't have it probably yet, but in Alaska it did not. So just add another question. I also wanted to quickly note that there was an extra cost for the RLA, as well as, and we'll talk more about that later, but and also that the notion of you said reduce effective spoiler candidates. I think we also ought to maybe phrase that as eliminate. I don't know, can we eliminate the effective spoilers? I think there's a technical category for that. You know, would adding another candidate make a difference? And there are voting methods that would go further to eliminate spoilers. So just trying
Wonderful comments. Thank you, Neil. I love having people.
Fabulous. I mean, it's pedantic, but it's also so instructive. You've done it so well. Thank you.
Okay, let's check out some other comments on the instant runoff voting in Boulder. So as Peggy said, the reported winner changed as more ballots were counted due to the difference between the early voting electorate and the election day electorate. So there was a lot of commentary on that. We already mentioned batch elimination was used, but it confused voters because they were used to seeing sequential elimination. And then the batch elimination also had a problem in the visualization software called the Sankey tab. There was a fair amount of misinformation and confusion in mainstream media and definitely in social media. And so the league felt a big need to do education and dialogue. I know I reached out to the Boulder Weekly because they said in their paper version that the Paul Tweedley and Nicole Spear could come back in at a later round. And what they meant was, with more votes coming in, the results would change. They did not mean in round 2 or round 3 they would come back. And so that was confusing. But okay. And then we had a separate risk limiting audit for the instant runoff voting because we have no state rules yet. Did you want to say something about that, Neil?
Well, we do have a state rule that says thou shalt audit an IRB contest. The rule does not, at least yet, require a risk limiting audit, because at the time the rule was written, very sagely, people recognized that that might be a big lift, but Boulder did that big lift, as I'll talk about. So, yeah.
Now's an okay time to talk about it if you want. Are you,
Super. Yeah, no, I would love to. So
do you want
today,
to share screen?
I don't have anything prepared, but today and I haven't seen anything posted, but I haven't gone and looked. Today, Boulder did the first ever audit of an instant runoff or single winner RCV contest in Colorado's history, and one of the very few in world history. So Boulder is to be highly commended for going from the notion that they had to do some sort of an audit of the contest to saying, we're going to do a risk limiting audit because we're the first, I don't know why, but they were the first county to do a risk limiting audit of any kind. So doubly on the map. And I wanted to say a couple things. So first, exactly that it's really historic, that it's a wonderful thing to do. And I think the procedure was very good. They got open source software to support that audit. The software is available online. It's pretty easy for techie people to download the software and just get it running, try it out and see how it works. I want to note that it's really complicated software to do this for reasons I won't go into in detail. But at the same time, I'll note that we have a position in favor of proportional representation for things like council. There is a ranking method with multiple winners that results in proportional representation, but we don't know. And in fact, in general, it might be impossible, like literally computationally too much cycles to audit a single transferable vote contest. So there's real problems with using that method to move forward to what our goal is, which is both proportional representation and auditable elections.
So Neil, I have a question for you about that. I know that there's no method known to do a risk limiting audit for an STV election, but are there other kinds of audits that are done? Like, do any of the jurisdictions that currently use STV do any kind of auditing?
I'll ask Celeste if Cambridge ever does any kind of auditing. I'm not aware of any auditing anywhere for STV. We will see what Portland and Albany and other places that use it do. But computationally, I will just say that the fact that you don't know what order the elimination will happen in, and the fact that if you have 10 candidates, there are 10 factorial different elimination orders, and that's a really big number. And if there's 20 candidates, it's 20 factorial. And again, I don't think the known universe could support trying them all. There might be cleverer methods, but the point is that because it's a sequential method, it and other sequential methods, I'm guessing, like certain forms of approval voting sequential proportional approval voting could be really messy. Whereas my favorite, which is just plain old proportional approval voting or proportional star voting, I think would be very straightforward to audit. So, as you know, people often say, well, let's get started with instant runoff for ranked choice methods, and then we'll be ready to move to the proportional version. And there's just very tricky auditing aspects with that.
Deborah, you had your hand up. I have a comment to make after you.
Okay.
I want to answer Dwight's point too, but let me think about it first. Sorry.
Oh, it's probably a stupid question, and I don't know if you want to spend the time to explain it. Is there a simple way to explain the difference between an audit and a risk limiting audit? I don't know what that means.
No, that's a really great question. So there are many ways to audit, and people have done audits, and Dwight suggests that there have been audits of IRV. Maybe Aspen did an audit. Is that what you're thinking about?
No, the in San Miguel
Okay.
County used to coordinate Telluride's IRVs, and well, you might be right, Neil. I was thinking those races would have been scooped up into the then random audit that was required at that time. But they were on separate ballot cards because they had a voting system that couldn't handle IRV. So I bet they weren't audited. I know the town of Basalt implemented some kind of random audit, but I don't know the details. But none of the audits that have been done, at least in Colorado, on IRV, have not yielded any kind of statistical confidence level in the outcome. It's just been like random anecdotal evidence that, yeah, as far as we can tell, everything was tabulated correctly.
Yeah, so I'm sorry to not answer your question directly first. So the difference between an audit, which can be most any form of kind of looking through records and seeing if it matches what you expect, and a risk limiting audit, is that a risk limiting audit has a formal statistical property that says, if in Boulder today, we did a risk limiting audit with a risk level of a limit of 3%, which says that your sample, you're doing a random sample to try to see if everything jives.
Oh, I
And
see.
there's only a 3% chance that the sample just happened to miss evidence that the result was wrong. So it's a very quantitative way of saying we looked at enough ballots to get very confident that if we looked at all the ballots, we would have found any problems that might exist. I don't know if
That makes complete sense now. Thank you.
Great.
So I have a question about RLAs. So you only pick a small sample because you've done all the math to figure out what sample works for your risk limit, for the margin of victory, et cetera, et cetera. So if there is a discrepancy that's found, you elevate, you do a second round, you pull more ballots, and you can elevate all the way to a full hand count. So, but a full hand count is different from a risk limiting audit. I mean, you could always do a full hand count of an STV election, but you wouldn't call that a risk limiting audit, correct?
No, I don't.
You actually make a great point. If we were to do a full hand count of an STV election and do all the calculations that implies and stuff in the appropriate ways, that would qualify as a risk limiting audit. And so I should qualify my statement and say there isn't an efficient way to do a risk limiting audit, because I know that Dwight and his team, Dwight doesn't want to tell the clerks that they all have to do a full hand count of every instant runoff election.
Unless it's a tie, 63 to 63.
That's not a full hand count, though. That's a machine recount.
And by the way, there was a tie, Dwight told us today, in Colorado in at least one election that will go to a recount. And there was one year that we had six different elections contests with ties in the same year.
But
Okay.
Love
Celeste,
that.
more to your point, though, the an accurate hand count of anything is a risk limiting audit with a 0% risk limit.
Correct.
Although,
And maybe impossible too, but
I was going to say accurate hand count. I throw that out there as simply a hypothetical concept. I'm not sure it actually exists.
So
and that's
so
just
we
a
will
fact
have a
of life.
zero. We have, so on any of these recounts, like the Boulder City Council is going to have a recount. You could say we have a 0% risk limit on that one.
Only if you're doing a hand count, Because
Yeah.
Oh.
they're
Colorado
really-
recounts are done by machine.
Got
If
it.
the initial tabulation was done by machine.
Okay,
I want to
okay.
touch on a couple other issues with the audit. I mean, again, I want to praise the people in Boulder who did it in so many ways so well. But there's an aspect of it that is really a problem around the country. And I have been crying, not as effectively as I could for years, for us to get back to the practice of having a publicly verifiable random sampling of the ballots. So right now we have a big fancy ceremony where everybody's invited from the public, and we roll dice and we come up with a 20-digit number that is used to, in a complicated way, figure out which ballots to audit. The problem is that the result of all that is only useful if people know which ballots that would cause to be audited ahead of time. And the way that it actually has worked the last couple of years is that they only show the information on that would help you know which ballots would be audited after the random numbers and dice have been rolled. And so in principle, and I'm not accusing anyone of doing this, but skeptics might not be satisfied. In principle, a county might change the order of the information that they display to make sure that certain ballots were not audited. And
Neil, I know this is very important, but it actually has to do with audits overall and doesn't have anything to do with voting methods. So can we move on?
Yes.
And people can contact you if they have more questions.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the last thing on here is the next steps. In 2026, that's the next time we'll in Boulder use IRV, and then it will be every 2 years. 3 years is a long time to wait, and Minneapolis waits 4 years, or at least used to wait 4 years. So it also gives us the opportunity to propose changes like using sequential batches instead of sequential elimination instead of batch elimination. And it'll be used in 2025 in Broomfield, we hope.
Can I share an anecdote about Minneapolis?
Yeah.
So they had an IRV election for mayor with 35 candidates, but you were only allowed to rank 3. So this is one issue that happens in IRV where you're not allowed to rank anywhere near as many candidates as are in the race. The person who won had more first place votes than anybody else had rankings at all. Like, you knew after the first round, it was mathematically impossible for this person to lose. And yet they did all 35 rounds of elimination and split the results.
Interesting. Okay.
Where was that?
I'm sure Dwight is listening.
Hmm.
Okay. Let's move on to other elections. Using voting methods or about voting methods, mostly about voting methods. I wanted to highlight East Hampton, Massachusetts, which has approved adoption of proportional RCV for their multi-winner city council. This is like the gold standard of all the different forms of RCV. They do already use IRV for single winner contests. I think they can't start using STV, the proportional version, yet, because I think they have to change a state law or something. I'm not exactly sure, but we should find out. Okay. 3 cities in Michigan voted to adopt instant runoff voting. And tomorrow there's going to be an election in Salt Lake City, and they will elect their mayor using IRV. So there were a couple other elections, but nothing changed. Like there was a question about whether they should stop using instant runoff voting, and that got defeated. So they will continue to use instant runoff voting. But if other people want to speak up about any other elections they know about that were particularly interesting about voting methods, now's a good time. Okay. So this next thing is not very long, but Kent Theory, who is a multi-millionaire, maybe a billionaire, he used to own DaVita, which is dialysis company, dialysis services. And he has done a lot of citizen initiatives in Colorado. I know Tony Larson has worked with him on amendments Y and Z. He got the unaffiliateds can vote in the Democratic or the Republican primary. That effort, basically, he does a lot of election things. And today in the Colorado Sun, there is an article that talks about a ballot measure he wants to do. He wants to change the voting method for all elective office from the state legislative level on up. I'm not exactly sure what that means. I'm sure it means governor, attorney general, but I'm not sure if it means state board of education. I'm guessing it means Congress and US Senate. But I'm not sure if it affects federal. So we haven't seen a draft, but this is going to be very interesting because he throws a lot of money at these things, and so he gets attention. Would people like to see a 5-minute video on this particular method he's suggesting, which is everybody runs against everybody in the primary? 4 candidates, you only get to choose one though. And then 4 candidates advance to the general election, and they use instant runoff voting. And I can show you.
I'll just say that Pitkin County has used a variant of that method. It's used the open primary. Everybody gets on the same ballot, and the top, in Pitkin County's case, the top 2 advance to the general, which was then conducted according to the plurality method. But the open primary thing has been done in Pitkin County since like 1979 for county offices.
We're going to talk about that in our primary election reform study. If we weren't before, we are now.
Oh,
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. Thank you, Dwight.
takes 100 signatures on a petition to get on the ballot.
If you have any details at your fingertips on when and how that was adopted, it'd be great.
1978 Home Rule Charter.
Oh,
Okay. I think don't you have a family member who served as county commissioner
I
in
do.
Pitkin County?
Would be my father.
Yeah. Okay.
Celeste.
Yes.
You've got the address for the article, so I will look that up.
Here it is. Well, okay. I don't know how to operate all these things sometimes. Okay. Yes, there it is. It's if you go to coloradosun.com, it's today, so it'll probably be on the front page. There's this voting method. It's called Final 5, I think, or Final 4, Final 5. And there's a 5-minute video we could watch if people want to see it, or I could put it in the chat if I know how to do that, or I could send it out later.
We only
Here
have
it
10
is.
minutes left, so do you want to spend 5 of them on a video?
No, not really, but I would like to maybe put this in the chat. So let me see if I can do this. Here's the 5-minute. Okay, so you all can watch it later. Let's go back to.
I also posted an article or an opinion piece he did many years ago on the same topic.
Who did?
Kent Theory.
Okay. I actually argued against him at the title board one year because he was going to basically keep minor parties off the ballot. He's changed that in this new proposal, according to the Colorado Sun article. But so one more thing is that this proposal would do is eliminate political party caucuses and assemblies. So every candidate would petition onto the ballot, and you would get a lot of petition weariness. People would get tired of signing petitions. And it would cost a lot more money. And there was a bill, House Bill 23-1308, that said that caucuses need to remain as a way to access the ballot, because petitioning onto the ballot is not a viable method for people with certain disabilities. That bill was introduced late in the session and did not proceed on, but I think that could be an issue here too. And then finally, it would eliminate vacancy committees to replace any of the state lawmakers. And it would replace them with special elections, which would make Dwight tear his hair out and all of the county clerks. So this is something we need to watch. And does anybody else have anything they want to say about this before we move on to
I'll
the?
just say that it hasn't been submitted.
It hasn't gone to the title board yet.
So I think anyone who has any clout should try to, and I don't know if Tony's still on the call. Tony and I were at his offices, if I remember correctly, when we were doing the fair elections proposal. He listens to the league and invited them to those the fair.
He did not list the league in the article. The league is not listed as one of his partners, but I think
but he has
should be
in the past, is my point. So
yeah.
if Tony or anybody else that knows him from
just,
them could get it changed so that Dwight's concern is addressed and any other fixes, I think we have some cred and we should try to use it quick before he actually gets it to the title board.
So let's be a little careful, because he was charged with setting prices along with some of his other the other competitors in the dialysis world.
Tony. He was
But he was, just a minute, he was not, he was exonerated, that's fine. But as far as his reputation in the political world, I think we need to make sure that we look at that closely to see if that's something we really want to work with him on.
So we can do things publicly or privately as individuals or whatever. This might be a big thing, but that's great to be careful about, how and where to show up.
One idea is that we could have a competing proposal, like, but I mean, ideally, working together is more effective than working in opposition. But yes, we could have a competing proposal. I think we want to be interested in this. I think we want to, the primary, I sent this article to Marcus, who's overseeing the primary election reform study, so that they're aware of it, and we'll see what happens.
So as soon as the ballot issue is approved for getting signatures, the league is taking a position on it. So that's different than what we've done in the past when we waited for it to actually be on the ballot. So
but we've also testified at the title board as a league.
This is different. We've done that a long time. But this, we're jumping into the arena earlier than we used.
Yeah. So the next, we're running out of time. We're not going to get to the Fair Vote Canada video. We never do, but we always have a lot to talk about. It's a great, I love these conversations. But just an update on the election reform study. The team members are reviewing a proposed outline. Deborah Lycan has been amazing in her comments. And the research, and for those of you who don't know, Marcus, the leader, lives in Israel. So it's been a little crazy in Israel this last month and a half. But a lot of the research has already been done on individual voting methods. We need to consider the entire structure, I think. And so there's more to do. And as we're continuing, we're thinking about good study questions for league consensus meetings. This whole primary general runoff system is fascinating, and we welcome people to join us with that. So with that, I think, are there any closing comments? I think I'll stop sharing my screen. Richard, I don't know who you are. Feel free to introduce yourself. Sorry, you missed most of the meeting.
Am I on?
Yeah.
It's Richard Valenti. You know who I am.
Oh,
Oh,
Richard.
I do know who Richard is.
So
Welcome.
I just go by one name now. And I'm very sorry I missed this whole thing. I appreciate being invited. I got invited late and had home responsibilities. So I just want to say thanks for what you're doing, and maybe I'll be better informed for a meeting at a later date.
Thanks.
So, Richard, do you want to tell people a little bit about your background with elections or legislature?
So I would say 20 years worth of civic involvement. I was I see Neil McBurnett there. I used to cover elections and local politics for the Colorado Daily. I go back to the days when Boulder County was choosing a new election system, and they got it in place for the 2004 election. And rumor has it that they had problems that year, but and then I continued to follow politics, and then I wound up working at the state capitol for Senator Heath and Representative Hooten, and that covers about my last 15 years. I was at the Capitol when they passed the bill to go to all mail elections, and I met with lots of elections related people over the time I was at the Capitol. So I would say I have a small amount of experience or thereabouts. How's that?
Great.
Good. Latina, I'm putting the Fair Vote videos in right now.
Thank you.
You know, they use different vocabulary there. So what we were going to do is we were going to, like they talk about ridings, which we would call a district or a constituency, things like that. So there's the first one. And here comes the second one. I think you might want to watch it with somebody else so you can ask questions, but feel free to watch it on your own. They have a lot of it in them, and I feel like I could watch them few times and I would still learn more things, or it would get better ingrained in my brain. So, yeah. Shall I stop the recording? Are we good? Hearing no objection.